October 17, 1938, Berlin, Germany. Anna Hoffmann stood at her kitchen window watching Gestapo agents drag her elderly neighbors from their apartment building. Frau and Herr Rosen, both in their 70s, were being shoved into a truck. Behind them in the doorway stood their 10-year-old granddaughter Sarah, dark braided hair, yellow star sewn onto her dress, frozen, silent, watching her grandparents disappear. Sarah's parents had been arrested 3 weeks earlier. Now the grandparents were being taken. The girl stood alone in the doorway with nowhere to go, no family left, 10 years old, and completely alone in a city that wanted her dead. Anna Hoffmann crossed the street, took the girl's hand, and brought her home. Just for one night, she told herself, just until the grandparents came back. Both of them knew the grandparents weren't coming back. That single decision would stretch into 1,147 days of silence and terror. 5 years of a child learning to disappear. 5 years of a family living one knock away from death. 5 years that would end on a spring morning in 1943 when the Gestapo finally came pounding on their door with a search warrant. Before we get into how this family survived 5 years of hiding a Jewish child in Nazi Berlin, I need to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments right now, just your location. Because what the Hoffmann family faced, this kind of impossible choice between your own survival and doing what's right, people face these choices in every country, every generation. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button. These stories need to be told. Stories about ordinary people who became extraordinary when history demanded it. Stories that remind us what courage actually costs. Now let me tell you how one German family risked everything to save a child, and how that decision changed all of them forever. The Hoffmann family was unremarkable by any measure. Otto Hoffmann, 41 years old, worked as a mechanic at a factory producing machine parts. His hands were permanently stained with grease. He came home exhausted every evening, speaking little, just wanting dinner and sleep before doing it all again the next day. Anna, 38, had been a schoolteacher before marriage but now managed their modest household in the Prenzlauer Berg district of Berlin. Their son Klaus was 15, caught between childhood and the Hitler Youth he'd been forced to join. Their daughter Greta was 8, small for her age, shy, always reading in corners. They were not political people. Otto had never joined the Nazi Party, which made advancement at the factory impossible, but kept his conscience relatively clear. Anna had quietly stopped attending the mandatory women's organization meetings after they began promoting ideas about racial purity that made her physically sick. But they weren't resistors. They weren't heroes. They'd watched Kristallnacht happen just weeks earlier, watched Jewish businesses destroyed, synagogues burned, people beaten in the streets. And like most Germans, they'd done nothing. They'd seen neighbors disappear and told themselves there must be reasons. The government must know what it's doing. They were ordinary people who made an extraordinary choice when confronted with a child standing alone in a doorway. When Anna brought Sarah through their door that October evening, Otto was already home from the factory. He stood in the kitchen doorway, work clothes still on, and stared at the Jewish girl his wife had just brought into their home. Anna could see everything in his face: the fear, the calculation of risk, the understanding that what she'd just done could kill them all. Klaus came into the room, sensing the tension. Greta peered around the corner, curious about the new girl. Sarah stood perfectly still, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. She understood already, at 10 years old, that her existence was a problem people had to solve. Otto looked at his wife for a long moment. Her jaw was set in that expression he'd learned over 15 years of marriage meant her mind was made up. He looked at his children, who would pay the price if this went wrong. He looked at Sarah, this skinny girl with braids and terrified eyes who had nowhere else to go. Just tonight, he finally said. Tomorrow we find somewhere else for her. But the next day, there was nowhere else. The Rosens' apartment had been sealed. Other Jewish families in the building were being arrested. The Reich's machinery of persecution was accelerating beyond anything they'd imagined possible in civilized Germany. Sarah stayed another night, then another. By the 4th night, it was clear she wasn't leaving. The conversation that defined everything happened after the children were asleep. Otto and Anna sat at their kitchen table, speaking in whispers that wouldn't carry through thin walls to neighboring apartments. The walls in these old Berlin buildings were paper thin. Everyone could hear everything. That would become part of their nightmare over the next 5 years. Otto laid out the reality in his mechanic's practical way. They'll kill us, all of us. The penalty for hiding Jews is death, not prison, not camps. Death, execution, for everyone who helps them. Anna's hands were wrapped around cold tea. Her voice was steady despite the terror. They'll kill her for certain. She's 10 years old. She has no one. The silence stretched between them. Finally Otto nodded. We'll need rules. Strict rules. She can never go outside, never near windows. If anyone comes to the door, she hides immediately. No noise during the day while we're gone. Klaus and Greta tell no one. Not friends, not teachers, not anyone. One mistake, and we all die. Anna nodded. One mistake, and we all die. They looked at each other across the scarred kitchen table, understanding that they'd just agreed to live on the edge of death for as long as this lasted. They thought perhaps weeks, maybe months. Surely this madness would end soon. Surely Germany would come to its senses. It was October 1938. The war hadn't even started yet. They had no idea it would be 7 years before Germany came to its senses. 7 years before the madness ended. But by then, so much would be destroyed that could never be rebuilt. Sarah adapted to invisibility with the competence of a child who understands her life depends on it. She learned the apartment's sounds, which floorboards creaked, which doors squeaked, which walls were shared with neighbors. She learned to move like a ghost through the 3 rooms that became her entire world. The Hoffman apartment was small, even by Berlin working-class standards. A kitchen where they cooked and ate. A main room serving as living and dining space. 2 bedrooms. That was it. Barely 650 square feet for what was now 5 people, though only 4 could officially exist. Anna and Otto gave up their bedroom to Sarah during the day. From 7 in the morning when the family left for work and school until 6 in the evening when Otto returned, Sarah had to stay in that bedroom in absolute silence. 8 hours a day of perfect stillness for a 10-year-old child. No flushing toilet, no running water, no footsteps, no coughing, no sneezing, no existing. Anna left food before leaving each morning. Bread, cheese, water. Enough for the day. Sarah would eat slowly, making it last, breaking the infinite monotony of silence with the small ritual of meals. She learned to chew without sound, to swallow quietly, to breathe shallowly so no one would hear. At night, after dark with curtains drawn and doors locked, Sarah could move more freely. She could speak in whispers. She could help with dishes, with laundry, small tasks that made her feel less like a burden. Greta, initially frightened of this strange presence, gradually warmed to having what felt like an older sister. Klaus, at 15, understood the danger better and watched Sarah with protective intensity that would only grow over the years. Anna began teaching Sarah in the evenings. Mathematics, literature, history that didn't match the propaganda being taught in German schools. The education Sarah would have received in the world that existed before 1933. Delivered in whispers around the kitchen table after dark. Sarah was bright, hungry for learning, grateful for anything that made the days feel purposeful rather than just endless hours of not being discovered. The first crisis came in December 1938, 3 months after Sarah's arrival. The building's block warden, Herr Dietrich, announced mandatory apartment inspections. Every unit had to be examined for proper blackout curtains, fire buckets, emergency supplies, civil defense regulations. The inspection was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. Anna received the notice and felt her stomach drop into her shoes. "She can't be here," Otto said that evening. His voice was flat with certainty. "We have to find somewhere else for her." That day, but where? They knew no one they trusted with this secret. No one who would risk death to hide a Jewish child for even a few hours. Sending Sarah outside, even briefly, meant someone might see her, recognize her, report her. The yellow stars Jews were forced to wear made them instantly identifiable. Sarah no longer had hers, which itself was illegal, and meant immediate arrest. Anna made the decision. The basement storage locker. Each apartment had a small storage space in the basement. Damp, cold, dark, filled with old furniture and boxes. But private, locked, no windows. No one would look there during an apartment inspection. On Thursday morning before dawn, before anyone else in the building was awake, Otto and Anna took Sarah down the back stairs. They'd prepared a space behind old furniture, blankets, water, a bucket. The space was pitch black with the door closed, cold enough their breath showed in Otto's torch beam. "I'll come get you as soon as the inspection is over," Anna said, wrapping extra blankets around Sarah's thin shoulders. "A few hours at most." Sarah nodded without speaking. She'd learned already not to cry. Tears accomplished nothing. They made noise. They drew attention. They were a luxury she couldn't afford. Anna locked the storage room and went back upstairs. Her legs shook on every step. The inspection took 4 hours. Herr Dietrich was thorough in the way party officials always were when trying to prove their loyalty. He checked every apartment in the building, examined blackout curtains, tested fire buckets, inventoried emergency food supplies, asked questions about household composition, employment, party membership. He found the Hoffman apartment satisfactory. Everything in order. Nothing suspicious. Then he lingered in their doorway, making conversation. "Fishing. Quiet household. Just the 4 of you?" Anna kept her voice steady. "Just the 4 of us." Good German family, the kind who will build the Reich's future. He finally left. Anna waited another hour to be certain he was truly gone, not lingering in the building, not watching to see who came and went. Then she went to retrieve Sarah. She found the girl exactly where they'd left her, sitting in absolute darkness behind the furniture, silent and still. She'd been alone in that cold black space for over 5 hours. She was shivering despite the blankets. Her lips were tinged blue, but she hadn't made a sound, hadn't called out, hadn't panicked. She'd simply waited. Anna wrapped her arms around the girl and felt her shake with suppressed emotion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Sarah's voice was small. "It's all right. I pretended I was a mouse. Mice are very good at hiding." Something broke and mended in Anna's chest. This child had learned to think of herself as a mouse, small, silent, prey, hiding from cats that wanted to kill her. 10 years old and already understanding the survival skills of animals. That night, Anna held Sarah while she finally cried. Quiet tears that wouldn't carry. Through walls. Tears for parents taken in September. Tears for grandparents dragged away in October. Tears for a childhood that had ended the day she watched her family disappear. By 1940, everything had gotten worse. The war had begun. Poland crushed in weeks. Denmark and Norway occupied. France collapsing. The Reich expanding across Europe while inside Germany, the persecution intensified with every passing month. Rationing was strict. Party control absolute. The penalty for hiding Jews was now officially codified in the laws. Death for everyone involved. No exceptions. No mercy. The Hoffman family now fed 5 people on rations for 4. Anna performed miracles with nothing. Stretching bread with sawdust. Making soup from potato peels and bones she'd normally discard. Trading Otto's cigarette rations for occasional vegetables from a farmer at the edge of the city. They were always hungry. But Sarah was hungrier. She insisted on taking less, knowing every bite she took was stolen from the people saving her life. Klaus, now 16, had become Sarah's fierce protector despite what this meant for him. He'd joined the Hitler Youth because refusing meant investigation, but he sat through their meetings with silent rage burning in his chest, learning their ideology, memorizing their slogans, saluting their flags, then coming home to teach Sarah mathematics and bring her books he stole from the library. Books by Jewish authors that had been banned and burned. Books that could get him arrested just for possessing. The strain showed on everyone. Otto came home more exhausted each day. The factory had converted entirely to weapons production for the Wehrmacht. Everyone was under constant surveillance for sabotage, for defeatist talk, for anything suggesting less than total commitment to final victory. One wrong word and investigations began. Investigations that would examine every aspect of a worker's life, including what happened in his home, including who lived there. Anna developed a tremor in her hands that never went away. She jumped at every knock, every unexpected noise, every footstep in the hallway outside their door. She'd lost weight they couldn't afford to lose. Her clothes hung loose on a frame that had once been pleasantly rounded. Her hair, once a rich brown, was rapidly graying. She looked in mirrors and saw a stranger, a frightened old woman who'd aged 20 years in 2. Greta, now 10, the same age Sarah had been on arrival, had grown up too fast. She'd learned to lie without hesitation, without the telltale signs children usually showed. She'd learned to watch adults for suspicion, to read faces and body language like a professional interrogator. She'd learned the world was dangerous, and trust meant death, and showing your real feelings could kill everyone you loved. Sarah at 12 was changing, growing. The dresses she'd arrived in were far too small. Anna remade them from scraps when she could find fabric, but there wasn't enough. Never enough. Sarah wore Klaus's old clothes cut down, looking like a small boy. Her hair grew long. They couldn't risk a barber. Anna cut it in the kitchen with kitchen scissors, catching every strand to burn in the stove so no evidence remained in the trash or on the floor. The second major crisis came in April 1941. Air raid drills became frequent as RAF bombing of German cities increased. When sirens sounded, all building residents had to go to the basement shelter. Attendance was mandatory. Block wardens checked names against housing registers to ensure full compliance. The Hoffmans were registered as 4 people. If they went to the shelter as 5, someone would ask questions. Someone would want to know who the 5th person was, why they weren't on the register. If they went as 4 and left Sarah alone during actual raids, she could die in the bombing. Otto made the decision after a night of whispered debate. During drills, Sarah stays hidden in the bedroom. During actual raids, we all stay here. Anna understood what he was saying. We could die. His face was grim in the dim light. Yes. Or we send an innocent child to certain death. Those are our choices. The first real air raid came on a May night. They heard neighbors hurrying down the stairs to the shelter, heard Dietrich's voice in the hallway. checking names against his list, heard the building empty below them. They stayed upstairs, huddled in the interior hallway away from windows. Sarah pressed between Anna and Greta, all five holding hands in the dark, waiting. The building shook. Plaster dust fell from the ceiling like snow. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. They could hear the anti-aircraft guns firing, the bomber engines overhead, the whistle of falling bombs. Each whistle might be the one that killed them. Their neighbors were in the shelter below, safe in reinforced basement walls. They were upstairs, exposed, choosing possible death over certain betrayal. The bombs fell elsewhere that night. 3 buildings in their neighborhood were destroyed. 47 people died. The Hoffmans survived, but Dietrich noticed their absence. The next day, he knocked on their door, his face stern, notebook in hand. The notebook where he recorded everything. "Why weren't you in the shelter last night?" Otto had prepared the lie in sleepless hours after the all-clear siren sounded. "My wife is claustrophobic, terrified of the basement. She panicked completely, started screaming. I couldn't force her down while she was having a breakdown." Dietrich's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Weakness is not an excuse. German women must be strong for the fatherland. She's working on it, getting better. The next drill, we'll be there. See that you are. He made a note in his book. They were being watched now, officially watched. One more suspicious action, and there would be questions, investigations. They attended every drill after that, walking out of the apartment as 5 people for the first time in years. Sarah dressed in Klaus's old clothes, cap pulled low over her face, walking between Greta and Anna, in the chaos of people hurrying to shelter, in the dim lighting of evening drills, with everyone focused on getting to safety quickly. A thin 12-year-old girl could pass as a visiting nephew, a boy from Hamburg sent to escape the heavier bombing there. They named her Stefan, a boy's name. If anyone asked, he was Anna's brother's son, temporarily staying with relatives until the bombing situation improved. The story was plausible. Many children were being evacuated from heavily bombed cities to relatives in cities that hadn't been hit as badly. It worked, barely. Each drill was terror. Walking past neighbors who'd known them for years, past Dietrich with his suspicious eyes and his notebook, past anyone who might look too closely, might ask too many questions, might notice that Stefan had appeared suddenly and never seemed to go outside or attend school or exist in any official capacity. By 1942, Sarah had been underground for 3.5 years. The longest she'd been outside was walking to the shelter during drills, maybe 10 minutes total across months and months, always at dusk or after dark, always with face hidden under a cap. She'd seen the sun perhaps 20 times in those years, always through gaps in curtains, always for seconds before being pulled back into shadow. She'd almost forgotten what sky looked like, what fresh air smelled like, what it felt like to run, to play, to simply exist in the world without fear. Her 13th birthday came and went largely unmarked. Anna baked a small cake with hoarded ingredients saved over weeks. No candles. Candles at night might show light through curtains, might make neighbors wonder why they were celebrating when nobody's birthday was officially registered for that day. No singing. Singing might carry through thin walls. Sarah blew on invisible candles and made wishes she didn't believe would come true anymore. She was becoming more than they could easily hide. At 13, developing into a young woman, needing things they could barely provide. Privacy for changing clothes in an apartment with no privacy. Supplies for her monthly cycle that couldn't be purchased, without raising questions about why a family with one 8-year-old daughter needed women's items in such quantities. Anna solved problems with ingenuity born of desperation. She sewed reusable cloth pads from old sheets that she bleached and reused month after month. She created a curtain corner in the bedroom where Sarah could change with some measure of dignity. She explained to Greta, now 11, that Sarah needed certain considerations. Greta accepted this with the matter-of-fact understanding of children who'd grown up in crisis, who'd never known anything but this life of secrets and fear. But the physical changes were minor compared to the psychological toll of years in hiding, years of silence, years of being a ghost in a world that wanted her. Erased. Sarah barely spoke anymore. Days could pass with only a handful of whispered words. She'd retreated deep into herself, into the books Anna found at tremendous risk, into a fantasy world where she had a future that extended beyond the next knock on the door, where she could imagine herself going to school, having friends, growing up in a world that didn't want her dead for being born Jewish. She developed habits that worried Anna deeply, counting things obsessively, steps across the room, bites of food, seconds between sounds from the street, organizing and reorganizing the few possessions she had, a hairbrush, 3 books, the doll she'd carried from her grandmother's apartment that was now worn smooth from being held through nightmares, checking locks that she couldn't actually reach. Control rituals for a life completely out of control. At night she had nightmares. Not screaming nightmares that would alert neighbors and mean discovery and death. She'd learned to suppress those, but silent terrors where she'd wake, gasping for air, her face wet with tears she'd cried in her sleep, tears she didn't even know she'd shed until she felt the wetness on her pillow in the dark. On bad nights, Anna would hold her and tell her stories. "Tell me about before," Sarah would whisper. "Tell me what the world was like when people could just live." And Anna would describe the world as it had been when she was young, before the Nazis, before the madness. Parks where children played without fear or stars on their clothing. Schools where learning happened in bright rooms with windows that opened to let in fresh air and sunlight. Shops where you could buy what you needed without ration cards or suspicious questions. Streets where you could walk freely without checking papers, without wondering if this was the day someone would report you for being born wrong. "Will it be like that again?" Sarah would ask. Anna didn't know how to answer. She'd stopped believing the war would end well. The news, carefully filtered through official channels, but supplemented by whispered rumors from Otto's factory and Klaus's Hitler youth meetings, was bad. The Wehrmacht was deep into Russia now. The final solution had begun, though that term hadn't yet reached them through official channels. But everyone knew. Jews were being sent east to special camps. Labor camps, they said. Resettlement camps. No one returned. No letters came back. Everyone understood what the silence meant. "Yes," Anna would lie. "It will be like that again. You'll go to school. You'll have friends. You'll grow up and have a normal life. You'll get married and have children and tell them stories about how you survived." Both of them knew it was a beautiful lie. But some nights, beautiful lies were all that kept you breathing. Klaus, now 18, received his conscription notice in September 1942. He was being drafted into the Wehrmacht. The notice came on a Tuesday. His departure was scheduled for the following Monday. Less than a week. His departure tore another piece from a family already fractured by years of constant fear. He was being sent east, to Russia, to fight for a regime he despised, forced to leave behind the Jewish girl he'd helped protect for nearly 4 years, the girl who'd become like a sister to him. The night before he left, he and Sarah sat in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed, speaking in whispers as always. The walls were thin. The neighbors were always listening. Everyone was always listening. "I don't want to go. I don't want to fight for them." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "You have to protect your family. If you refuse, they'll investigate why. They'll look into everything. They'll come here. They'll find me." Klaus stared at his hands, these hands that had helped hide her, feed her, teach her mathematics and smuggle her banned books. "If I die over there, it won't matter. All of this won't matter. You won't die. You'll come back. And when this is over, you'll tell people what you did, how you saved me, how your family was brave when everyone else looked away." Klaus looked at this girl who'd been 10 when she arrived and was now 13, who'd spent her teenage years in silence and shadow, who'd become part of their family in ways that transcended blood. What if there's nothing left to save by then? What if you don't make it? What if none of us make it? Sarah's eyes were older than her years, far older. There's always something left to save, even if it's just the truth of what happened. Even if I don't survive, you remember. You tell people. You make sure they know what your family did, what it cost. Klaus left the next morning. Anna pressed a small package into his hands. Extra socks she'd knitted from unraveled yarn. Some hard candy saved from his rations over months. A photograph of the family, carefully excluding Sarah, though she'd been the one who suggested taking it. They stood on the street and watched him walk away. A teenager in an oversized uniform heading east to fight in a war none of them believed in. To kill people who weren't their enemies. To maybe die himself. They didn't hear from him for 4 months. 4 months of not knowing if he was alive or dead. By 1943, new dangers had layered on top of all the old ones that hadn't gone away. The building's population was changing. Families whose men had died at Stalingrad were being relocated to smaller apartments. Some were being moved out entirely. New families were moving in. Party officials. Gestapo. People who watched. People whose job was finding hidden things. A new family moved into the apartment directly below theirs in January. The Richters. Hans Richter was Gestapo, assigned to the Berlin office investigating enemies of the state, traitors, defeatists, Jews in hiding. His wife Elsa was a true believer, active in the women's organization, always watching neighbors for signs of ideological weakness, for hints that someone wasn't completely committed to final victory. They had 2 young children who could be heard through the floor at all hours, playing, laughing. existing with the freedom that Sarah couldn't have, would never have. Every footstep above them now had to be carefully considered, every sound evaluated for how it might seem to Gestapo ears below, every movement analyzed from the perspective of someone trained to find hidden things, someone whose entire job was discovering people exactly like Sarah. Sarah, now 14, spent entire days frozen in place, barely breathing, while the Richter children played beneath her. She learned their routine through the sounds that came through the floor, when Herr Richter left for the Gestapo offices, when Frau Richter took the children out for their walk, the brief windows when movement might be marginally safer. The strain was breaking them all in different terrible ways. Otto had become silent and withdrawn in ways that frightened Anna. He spent his evenings staring at walls, occasionally weeping quietly when he thought no one could see. The burden of protecting 5 people when one wrong step meant death for everyone had hollowed him out from the inside. He'd lost 30 pounds. His hands shook when he worked. His supervisor at the factory had asked repeatedly if he was ill, if he needed to see a doctor, if something was wrong at home. Anna's tremor had worsened to the point where she could barely hold a cup without spilling. She'd developed a nervous tic, touching her face repeatedly, as if checking that she was still real, still there, still alive. She'd lost so much weight that her clothes hung on her like scarecrow's rags. She looked like she'd aged 20 years and 5. Other women in the building asked if she had cancer, if she needed help, if there was something they could do. Greta at 12 had become hard in ways a child shouldn't be. Her eyes were flat and watchful. She lied fluently to teachers, neighbors, other children. She watched everyone with suspicion, cataloging their movements, their questions, their potential threat level. She'd learned that survival meant trusting no one outside their walls. She'd forgotten what it felt like to have a real friend. The children at school sensed something wrong with her, something off. They mostly left her alone, and Sarah had begun to give up hope. 4 years and 3 months of hiding had worn her down to something that barely seemed alive. She moved like a ghost, spoke only when spoken to, existed in the spaces between moments, waiting for the end that seemed inevitable now. One night in February 1943, she asked Anna a question that had been building for months. "Why are you keeping me alive? What future am I being saved for?" Anna had no answer. The Reich seemed unstoppable. The war showed no signs of ending. The reports from the East, fragmentary and horrifying even through official censorship, suggested that Jews were being systematically murdered in numbers too large to comprehend. Survival for another year meant nothing if it just meant another year of this. Another year of being a mouse hiding from cats. Another year of silence and shadow, and waiting for the knock that would end everything. Because life matters, Anna finally said. The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Because you matter. Because letting them win means becoming what they are. Maybe they've already won. Sarah's voice was barely audible. Maybe they won the day I walked through your door and turned your family into criminals. Turned you into people who have to lie every day just to stay alive. Maybe keeping me alive is what's killing all of you. Anna had no response to that. Some nights, in her darkest moments, she wondered if Sarah was right. The crisis that nearly destroyed everything came on a morning in March 1943. Frau Richter from downstairs knocked on their door. It was mid-morning. Otto had left for the factory hours ago. Sarah had fled instantly to the bedroom hiding space they'd created behind a false wall panel Otto had built 2 years earlier. A space just large enough for her to curl up in. Invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and what to look for. Anna answered the door. Her heart was already hammering. Frau Richter stood there smiling, that bright, warm smile that didn't reach her eyes. I wanted to introduce myself properly. We've been neighbors for months, but I've been so busy with the children. May I come in for coffee? Anna had no choice. Refusing would seem suspicious, hostile, something to report to her Gestapo husband. She stepped aside and let the woman enter. Elsa Richter walked in looking around with bright curiosity. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail. The apartment that seemed too tidy. No clutter, no personal items carelessly left visible. Everything carefully controlled in ways that normal families weren't. Such a cozy apartment. Just you and your husband and daughter? Anna forced her voice steady. Just the 3 of us now. Our son is in the Wehrmacht, fighting in Russia. How wonderful that he's serving the fatherland. You must be very proud. They sat in the kitchen drinking ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Real coffee hadn't been available for years. Elsa chatted about party activities, about the women's organization, about how German women must support the war effort through sacrifice and vigilance. Her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging, noting, filing away details for later. Anna saw what Elsa saw. The apartment that was too clean, too organized, too controlled. The apartment that looked like people were constantly trying to hide something. You keep a very organized home, very tidy, almost austere. Anna managed a small smile. My mother taught me, cleanliness is next to godliness, indeed. Though I've noticed something curious. Elsa paused delicately. You seem to use quite a lot of water for a household of 3, more than would seem normal for your family size. My husband noticed it on the building consumption reports. The Reich tracks these things now to prevent waste. He notices patterns like that in his work. Small irregularities that might indicate something unusual. Anna's blood froze. They tracked water usage. Of course they did. The Reich tracked everything. Every consumption of resources. Every irregularity. Every anomaly that might indicate someone was doing something they shouldn't be. Like hiding an extra person who wasn't supposed to exist. The lie came quickly. Born of desperate necessity and years of practice. I do laundry for my elderly mother. She lives across the city. Can't manage it herself anymore. Her clothing. Her linens. It's my duty as a daughter. I collect it weekly and return it when it's clean. How kind of you. Family loyalty is so important in these times. Elsa's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes did. Something cold and calculating. You know, my husband investigates various irregularities as part of his work. People hiding things. People helping enemies of the Reich. Jews. Political criminals. Deserters. He's very good at noticing small inconsistencies. Patterns that don't quite make sense. Details that don't add up. It wasn't a question. It was a warning, or a threat, or both. A message delivered with perfect deniability. We know something is wrong here. We're watching. One mistake and we'll find it. And when we do, everyone in this apartment will die. I'm sure he is, Anna said. Her voice was calm despite the terror. It's important work, keeping Germany safe from enemies within. They finished their coffee, made more small talk about rationing and the war and the weather. Elsa finally left, still smiling that cold smile. Anna waited until she heard the downstairs door close. Then she went to the bedroom and slid open the false panel. Sarah was curled in the hiding space, a cavity barely large enough for her 14-year-old body. She'd been there for over an hour without moving, without making a sound. Her face was white, her eyes huge. She'd heard every word through the thin panel. They know something's wrong. Her voice was barely a whisper. Anna pulled her out of the space, held her despite the trembling in her own hands. We'll be more careful. We'll use less water. We'll fix the pattern they noticed. But they both knew the truth. Once the Gestapo became suspicious, they didn't let go. They watched. They waited. They gathered evidence piece by piece. And then they came with search warrants and guns and the certainty that they would find what they were looking for. That night when Otto came home, they had the conversation they'd been avoiding for 4.5 years. The one about endings. About whether continuing was even possible anymore. About whether survival meant letting go of the girl they'd protected for so long. Otto's voice was defeated in a way Anna had never heard before. We can't do this anymore. She's right. Richter is watching us. His wife is watching us. They'll find her eventually. When they do, they'll kill all of us. Not just you and me. Greta too. Our 12-year-old daughter will die because we're trying to save someone else's child. The words hung between them like poison. So what do you want to do? Otto's head was in his hands. I don't know. I don't know anymore. But I can't watch our daughter die because we made a choice 5 years ago. I can't make that sacrifice. Sarah had been listening from the doorway. She spoke quietly, her voice carrying more strength than it had in months. I should leave. If I go, you'll be safe. I'll say I snuck in without you knowing. I'll say I forced you to help me. I'll tell them whatever story might save you. They won't believe it, but it's the only thing that might work. No. Anna's voice was immediate and final. Absolutely not. I'm 14 now, old enough to try on my own. Maybe I can find someone else willing to help. Maybe I can hide somewhere until the war ends. Maybe there's still a chance somewhere out there. Maybe nothing. Anna's voice was sharp with fear and love. You walk out that door, and you'll be picked up within an hour. Your papers aren't valid. You have no ration cards. You look Jewish. They'll know immediately. They'll torture you to find out who helped you. Then they'll kill you. And then they'll come here anyway and kill us for letting you go. Otto lifted his head from his hands. So what do? Wait for them to come? Wait for Richter to knock on the door with a search warrant and armed men? The room was silent. There was no good answer. Every choice led to death or the risk of death. They'd known this from the beginning, but somehow knowing it and facing it were completely different things. Greta spoke from the doorway where she'd been standing silently. She was 12 now, the same age Sarah had been when she first understood that the world wanted her dead for being born Jewish. Her voice was calm, matter of fact, with the hardness of a child who'd grown up too fast in impossible circumstances. We do what we've been doing. We hide her better. We're more careful. We don't give up. We've made it this far. We can make it farther. They looked at their 12-year-old daughter who'd spent 5 years learning to lie without hesitation, learning to watch for danger, learning that the world was cruel, and survival meant never trusting anyone outside these walls. She's right. Anna's voice was quiet but firm. We've survived this long. The Allies are advancing. The war can't last forever. We just have to survive long enough. Otto looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the Jewish girl they'd hidden for 1,682 days. He thought of Klaus fighting somewhere in Russia. He thought of the man he'd been before this started, and the man he'd become. He thought about what it would mean to give up now after coming so far. We'll need a better hiding place. The false panel isn't enough anymore. If Richter comes with a search warrant, if they're thorough, they'll find her. We need something better. Something they won't find even if they tear this apartment apart. Over the next 2 weeks, Otto built something that would save all their lives. The building's attic was shared space, used for storage, accessed by a common ladder. Each tenant had a small assigned area for trunks and boxes, and things they didn't need but couldn't throw away in wartime when everything might become valuable later. Otto had never used their space much, but now he began spending evening hours up there, ostensibly organizing old belongings, moving boxes around, sorting through things. What he was actually doing was far more complex and dangerous. He measured the space carefully. The attic had angled ceilings following the roof line. In the darkest corner of their assigned section, where the roof met the floor at an acute angle, there was a triangular space, maybe 2 feet high at the tallest point, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep. Barely noticeable among the stacked boxes and old furniture everyone stored up there. Otto built a false wall across that corner, perfectly aligned with the existing walls and roof angle. He painted it the same color as the surrounding surfaces. He arranged boxes in front of it so naturally that it looked like the boxes were simply stacked against the wall. Nothing suggested there was empty space behind. Nothing indicated this wall was newer than the others. Nothing drew attention. Behind that false wall, in that triangular space barely larger than a coffin, he created a hiding place. A space just large enough for a person to lie down in, to hide when discovery was imminent, to disappear when the Gestapo came. He installed a tiny vent that connected to the building's existing ventilation system, disguised, so it looked like original construction. He added a concealed door that could only be opened from inside by pressing a specific sequence of boards. From outside, the wall looked completely solid. The boxes looked undisturbed. Nothing suggested human intervention. He furnished this space with absolute minimum requirements: a thin mattress, a blanket, a bucket with a lid, a bottle of water, some bread in a sealed tin to keep rats away, a tiny electric torch wrapped in cloth so its light wouldn't show through any gaps. It was a coffin for the living, a space where someone could hide if discovery was imminent, a last resort when all other options had failed. He showed it to Sarah on a Tuesday evening in April 1943, taking her up to the attic after dark, when no one would see, when neighbors were eating dinner or listening to radio broadcasts about glorious victories that everyone knew were actually defeats. If they come for us, if you hear them at the door and can't hide in the bedroom panel, you come up here. You get in this space. You don't come out until Anna or I come to get you. Not for any reason. Not if you hear screaming. Not if you hear gunshots. Not if the building is on fire. You stay here until we come. Do you understand? Sarah looked at the space, the hiding place that was barely larger than a grave. That would be pitch black and airless and terrifying, where she might have to stay for hours, maybe days, maybe forever if no one came back. What if you don't come? Otto was quiet for a long moment. Then you wait 3 days. If no one has come in 3 days, if you haven't heard our voices, you wait until night. You get out of this building. You run. You find the resistance network we've heard about, the people who helped Jews escape. You tell them what happened. You survive. You tell people what your real name is. You tell them about your parents and your grandparents. You tell them about us. You make sure people know. I don't want to survive without you. Sarah's voice was small. You're my family now. The only family I have left. Otto felt his throat close. This girl who wasn't his daughter but had become his daughter over 5 years of hiding. This Jewish child he'd promised to shelter for one night that had turned into 1,716 nights. That might turn into many more nights if they were lucky, or might end tomorrow if they weren't. You're our family too. That's why we're going to make it through this. All of us together. They practiced. Sarah learned to slip up the attic ladder quickly and quietly, to move through the boxes without disturbing anything, to open the false door, to slide inside, to close it behind her, to lie perfectly still in that dark, cramped space. All in under 3 minutes. She learned to breathe shallowly so the vent would circulate enough air. She learned to control her panic in the darkness. She learned to be a mouse again, but smaller than before. a mouse hiding from cats that were getting closer every day. The hiding place was finished just in time. On April 28, 1943, at 6:15 in the morning, the Gestapo came. The pounding on the door woke them all. That distinctive Gestapo knock, not the knock of someone expecting to be let in politely, the knock of someone who would break down the door if necessary, the knock that meant everything was ending. Gestapo, open immediately. Otto and Anna's eyes met across the bedroom. No time for the attic, no time for anything but the bedroom panel. The false wall Otto had built years ago when they'd first understood this day would eventually come. Sarah was already moving. She'd been awake. She always woke at the slightest sound now. Some part of her brain stayed alert even in sleep, waiting for this moment. She slid into the bedroom false panel before anyone could speak. The panel closed with a barely audible click. Sarah was gone, disappeared, invisible. Otto opened the door. Hans Richter stood there with two other Gestapo officers. Behind them several uniformed police, armed, ready for resistance, ready for anything. Otto Hoffmann? Yes. We have information that you are harboring an enemy of the Reich, a Jew. We're here to search your apartment. Step aside. Anna appeared in the doorway wearing her nightgown, her face perfectly composed despite the terror screaming in her chest. That's absurd. There's no one here but our family. Then you have nothing to worry about. Richter pushed past Otto into the apartment. His men followed. The search was methodical and terrifying. They opened every cupboard, every drawer, every storage space. They pulled up rugs looking for hiding spaces in the floor. They tapped walls listening for hollow spaces that might indicate false construction. They went through clothes looking for sizes that didn't match the registered family members. They examined ration books looking for discrepancies in food consumption that might indicate an extra mouth to feed. Greta sat on the sofa and watched with a blank face. She didn't cry, didn't protest, didn't show any emotion at all. Just watched as strange men destroyed their home looking for the girl hidden 3 meters away behind a false wall panel that Otto had built so carefully 5 years ago. The search reached the bedroom. Richter was thorough in that way Gestapo officers always were. He pulled out all the drawers from the dresser, looked under the bed, opened the wardrobe, and examined every piece of clothing. He stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, looking for anything that seemed wrong, any detail that didn't fit. He faced the wall where Sarah was hidden behind the false panel. Barely 6 inches of space between the panel and the real wall. Sarah was in there, frozen, not breathing, not moving, knowing that if he found the seam in the panel it was over for everyone. Richter tapped the wall experimentally with his knuckles, listening for the hollow sound that would indicate empty space behind. He moved along the wall, tapping every few feet, listening. His face was concentrated, professional. This was his job, finding hidden things, finding hidden people. He tapped 6 inches from where the panel seam was, paused, listened, moved to the next section, tapped again. Anna stood in the doorway watching, unable to breathe, unable to move. If he found it now, after 5 years, after 1,716 days of hiding, after everything they'd sacrificed and risked and lost, Richter tapped again. The sound was slightly different here, slightly more hollow. He paused, frowned, tapped again in the same spot. Anna felt the world narrow to this moment, this second. This tap on a wall that might mean discovery, might mean death for everyone, might mean the end of everything. Richter tapped one more time, then moved on. He'd been 4 inches from the panel seam, 4 inches from Sarah, 4 inches from ending it all. But the wall construction was good enough. The false panel was hidden well enough. He moved on to examine the rest of the room. The search continued. They went through the kitchen, the bathroom, back to the main room. They were starting to look frustrated. Someone had clearly informed on the Hoffmanns. Someone had reported suspicious activities, but the evidence wasn't appearing. The hidden Jew they'd been told about wasn't being found. Who gave you this information? Otto asked carefully, trying to sound curious rather than terrified. That's not your concern. Richter's voice was sharp with anger. Someone in this building reported suspicious activities. Water usage inconsistent with family size. Food consumption that doesn't match ration books. Strange sounds at night. Neighbors notice things. Loyal Germans report things that seem wrong. Anna forced herself to speak calmly. We have nothing to hide. As you can see, there's no one here but us. You're lying. Richter stared at her with cold certainty. I can see it. You're hiding something. I know you are. Sir, we've found nothing. One of the other officers reported. No evidence of anyone else living here. No extra clothing, no hidden food stores, nothing. Richter was not satisfied. His professional pride was wounded. He'd been so certain. Check your attic storage area. Anna's heart stopped. The hiding place. If Sarah had gone to the attic instead of the bedroom panel, if she was up there now in that coffin-sized space, if they searched thoroughly enough to find the false wall Otto had built so carefully. But Sarah was in the bedroom panel. She'd had no time to get to the attic. The attic hiding place was empty, just boxes and old furniture and a false wall that looked like original construction. They went up. Anna and Otto and Greta had to stay in the apartment while Richter and his men searched the attic. They could hear footsteps above, sounds of boxes being moved, conversations they couldn't make out. The search went on for 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Finally, the Gestapo came back down. Nothing. The officer reported to Richter. Just old furniture and storage boxes. Nothing suspicious. Richter's face was red with anger and frustration. This isn't over. I'll be watching this family. One slip, one inconsistency, one piece of evidence, and I'll be back. Do you understand? They understood. They nodded, showed appropriate indignation at being falsely accused. Richter and his men finally left. The door closed. Otto locked it with shaking hands that he couldn't control anymore. They waited 15 minutes to be certain the Gestapo was truly gone, truly not coming back, not waiting outside to see what the family would do. Then Anna went to the bedroom and slid open the false panel with trembling fingers. Sarah was curled in the tiny space, tears streaming silently down her face. She'd been in there for nearly 2 hours, hearing every word, hearing them search, hearing Richter tap the wall inches from her hiding place, knowing that if they found her, everyone she loved would die. Anna pulled her out, held her while she shook with silent sobs. Greta came and wrapped her arms around them both. Otto stood in the doorway feeling 1,000 years old, feeling like everything inside him had been hollowed out and replaced with exhaustion and fear. Who told them? Anna's voice was barely audible. Otto shook his head. I don't know. Someone who noticed. Something. Someone who suspects. A neighbor. Someone in the building. What do we do? He looked at his family. His wife who'd lost 30 pounds and aged 20 years in 5. His daughter who'd had to grow up too fast and become hard in ways children shouldn't be. The Jewish girl they'd hidden for 4 years and 9 months. Almost 5 years. 716 days of living one moment away from death. We keep going. What else can we do? But everything had changed. They'd survived the search, but barely. Richter was watching them now. Officially watching. One more mistake. One more suspicious observation. One more anonymous tip, and the Gestapo would be back. And next time, they might look more carefully at that bedroom wall. Next time, they might find the seam in the panel that Otto had hidden so well. The last months were the hardest. May 1943 to May 1945. 24 months of knowing they were being watched. Knowing discovery was always one moment away. Knowing the end was coming, but not knowing if it would be liberation or death. News filtered in from multiple fronts. The Allies had landed in Italy. The bombing raids were increasing. The Reich was losing on every front, though official propaganda still proclaimed final victory was certain. Germany was being crushed between Soviet forces in the east and Allied forces in the west. Everyone knew the war was ending, but no one knew who would arrive first, liberation or the Gestapo. Otto came home from the factory with whispered news. The Russians are advancing. They're in Poland now. They might reach Berlin by summer, or the Americans might come from the west. Either way, it can't be much longer. But longer than what? Longer than they could survive. Longer than Richter's patience? Longer than their luck would hold? They lived every day expecting the knock. Expecting the search that would find what the first search had missed. Expecting the end. Klaus's letter finally came in November 1944. Sent from a field hospital in Hungary. He'd been wounded. A piece of shrapnel in his leg. Not life-threatening, but serious enough to be sent home. He was being medically discharged. Coming back to Berlin. Anna cried when she read the letter. Her son was alive. Coming home. Would see Sarah again. Would see all of them again. Would survive the war. He arrived in January 1945. Limping. Thin. His eyes carrying things he would never speak about. Things he'd seen. Things he'd done. Things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. But alive. He came through the door and saw Sarah. Now 15. Taller. Thinner. But alive. Still alive after 6 years and 3 months of hiding. They looked at each other and no words were necessary. How? He asked his parents later. We survived. That's all. We just survived. The bombing intensified through winter and spring. Berlin was being destroyed systematically. The Russians were coming from the east, getting closer every day. The sound of artillery could be heard in the distance now, getting louder, coming closer. On April 21st, 1945, the first Russian shells fell in Berlin proper. The battle for the city had begun. For 3 days, the Hoffman apartment building shook with explosions. They stayed in the basement with other residents during the worst of it. Sarah with them. No longer pretending, no longer hiding. Richter and his family had fled west weeks ago as the Russians approached. Most of the Gestapo had fled, or were fighting in the last desperate battles. The Reich that had wanted Sarah dead was dying around them. On April 25, 1945, Russian soldiers reached their neighborhood. The fighting was over. Berlin had fallen. The war in Europe would officially end 2 weeks later, but for the Hoffmans, for Sarah, the war ended that day. They emerged from the basement into a destroyed city, buildings shattered, streets full of rubble, but they were alive. All 6 of them. Otto, Anna, Klaus, Greta, and Sarah. The family that had survived 2,383 days of hiding. 6 years and 7 months from the day Anna brought Sarah home for one night. Sarah walked outside for the first time in over 6 years. She stood in the street and looked at the sky, the sun, the clouds, the world she'd almost forgotten existed. She was 15 years old. She'd spent her entire teenage life underground, hidden, silent, invisible. Anna stood beside her, watching her see the world again. We made it. We actually made it. Sarah was crying. Not silent tears anymore. Not suppressed emotion that couldn't show. Just crying openly for the first time in 6 years. For her parents who'd been murdered. For her grandparents who'd been taken. For her childhood that had been stolen. For everything she'd lost and could never get back. But also for this moment. For survival. For the family who'd risked everything to save her. For still being alive when the world had wanted her dead. The years after were difficult in different ways. The discoveries of what had happened in the camps. The full scope of the Holocaust revealed in photographs and testimonies and the skeletal survivors. 6 million Jews murdered. Sarah's parents and grandparents among them. Gassed at Auschwitz in 1943. Dead while Sarah had been hiding 300 miles away. Unable to save them. Unable to even know they were dying. The Hoffman family had saved one life. Just one. Out of 6 million. A single drop in an ocean of blood. But that one life was everything. That one life was Sarah Rosen, who grew up to become Sarah Hoffman after Anna and Otto legally adopted her in 1946, who went to university, who became a teacher like Anna had been, who married and had children and grandchildren, who lived to be 87 years old, who died in 2015 surrounded by a family that wouldn't have existed if not for the choice Anna Hoffman made on October 17, 1938. Klaus never spoke much about what he'd seen in Russia, but he spent his life working with displaced persons, helping refugees, helping people who'd lost everything find new lives, making amends in the only way he could. Greta became a social worker, spending her career helping children who'd experienced trauma, who'd grown up too fast, who'd learned the world was dangerous. She understood them in ways others couldn't. Otto died in 1962, 70 years old, his hands still shaking, still haunted by the fear that had never completely left him, still waking at night from dreams of Gestapo knocking on doors. But he died knowing he'd done something that mattered, knowing he'd saved a life when saving lives meant risking everything. Anna lived to 93. She died in 2003. By then, Sarah's children and grandchildren called her grandmother. By then, the story of what the Hoffman family had done was documented in Holocaust museums and survivor testimonies. By then, Otto and Anna had been recognized as righteous among the nations by Israel. By then, everyone knew what their courage had cost and what it had saved. In 2015, when Sarah died, she left behind 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. 37 descendants who existed because Anna Hoffman had seen a child standing alone in a doorway in 1938 and made a choice. 37 lives that came from one decision to help instead of look away. The cost of that decision had been 6 years and 7 months of constant terror. The loss of their health, their youth, their peace, the risk of death every single day. But the result was 37 people who would never have been born, 37 stories that would never have been told, 37 futures that would never have existed. Germany never expected ordinary people to resist. The Reich counted on fear, on self-preservation, on people looking away because getting involved meant death. They counted on families choosing their own survival over saving strangers. They didn't account for people like the Hoffmans, ordinary people who weren't heroes, who weren't particularly brave or political or idealistic. Just ordinary people who saw a child alone and made an extraordinary choice, who paid an extraordinary price, who lived with extraordinary fear for 6 years and 7 months because letting that child die was unthinkable. This is the story of the German family who hid a Jewish girl for 5 years, who survived the Gestapo search, who lived through the war, who saved one life when saving one life meant everything, who showed that even in humanity's darkest hour, even when the cost was almost unbearable, some people still chose courage over safety. Still chose to save lives instead of saving themselves. The story of the Hoffman family is documented in the archives of Yad Vashem, in Sarah Rosen's testimony recorded in 1995, in the letters and photographs preserved by her descendants, in the memorial at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Every detail of their 6 years and 7 months of hiding is recorded. Every risk they took, every choice they made, every moment they lived with the knowledge that one mistake meant death for everyone. They were not heroes when they started. They were just ordinary people who made a choice. But by the end, by the time Sarah walked outside into the sunlight on April 25, 1945, they had become something more. They had become proof that even in the darkest times, humanity survives in the choices ordinary people make. The knock they feared came on April 28, 1943. The Gestapo searched their apartment for 2 hours. They tapped the walls looking for Sarah's hiding place. They came within 4 inches of the false panel where she was hidden. Within 4 inches of discovery, that would have meant execution for the entire family. But they didn't find her. And 2 years later, when the war ended, Sarah Rosen walked outside for the first time in 6 years, and lived, and had a family, and told the story so that people would remember what courage costs and what it saves.